So what the cognitive functions do is allow us to maneuver through the environment without being overwhelmed by things and to find bits of information that would be much more, I would say, valuable to whatever schematizations and goals that we have, because I don't think that the cognitive functions per se find goals for us. The mode of being human makes goals for us, and then the cognitive functions find goals that fit what our human desires already, I would say, allocate or hand over to us. And also what can be noted is that there are several modes of thought that can even further exstantiate this picture, and that is that there is latent inhibition in the brain. And latent inhibition in the brain is the tendency for the brain to store events and phenomenon as unimportant once it's been exposed to them over a certain amount of time, and to take and not give much credence and value to micro expressions of things, as in amorphous or not very really definite or distinct patterns of things in the environment, such as blots on the wall or stains in a carpet per se. Unless you care about the carpet, you don't denote meaning in the stain. You don't think the stain stands for something or is something other than a stain on the carpet that you now need to call the rug cleaners to come over and remove the stain from your carpet, or that the stain on the wall means the second coming. Whereas people who tend to have low latent inhibition do put meaning and do see the world for the and familiar phenomenon as if it's their first time seeing it over and over and over again, and they have a very real tendency to associate why and causality with things that most people do not on the first hand or even in the remote slightest schema of possibilities. And that's to say that the brain skews our focus but then retards stimulus over time by way of the functions as well, as I think, unless one does have low latent inhibition. Because the brain is self-referential, and it needs to distinguish between what it knows and what it doesn't know, and is set on making patterns. It will make patterns because it really wants to simplify reality and make it easier for us to maneuver through an environment, and the cognitive functions contribute to this task. Now, the difference in cognitive functions gives a different look in the way that this schematization exists in a person, as well as superordinate traits, as I would say low latent inhibition is a superordinate trait that is going to influence one's personality more so than the personality influencing it. I don't think that will ever be the dynamic between the two things. Moving from that, it's to say that there is also a tendency to have a sort of a proximal salience in terms of events. You don't get out of the bed and say, what could happen today? You don't get out of the bed and say, I don't want to step out of the bed because I don't want to slip, because if I slip, I'm going to break my ankle, and if I break my ankle, I'm going to lose my job, and if I lose my job, I'm going to become homeless, and if I become homeless, I'm going to wind up in Calcutta or something, married to some 6-year-old prostitute who is a heroin addict, and my parents will disown me and whatever. Because of the chain of reasoning per se that's associated with getting out of your bed, the brain tends to dampen a proximal saliency. So it has a resolution in terms of immediacy and events that it says are important and that will connect to these things in the future. It's also why procrastination tends to be a habit in people, because we're not very good at seeing the future in a lot of times, and the consequences things will have. What I said was far-fetched, obviously, but it was to be an extreme illustration of a tendency in the brain that I think the cognitive functions also aid in saying that this information salient now, and how are we going to project it into the future, or how are we not going to project it into the future per se. And that's really how the brain breaks off or is I would say roughly organized in its tendencies towards schematization and patternization. Patternization is not necessarily schematization. Schematization is the creation of nodes of patterns that one uses to rationalize and organize information, and things that people use to project onto the information already given in the environment to figure out how to act and what to do, or what to think about a thing, to where patternization seems to be the more meta aspect of something, I would say, that it leads even to the schematization itself, because you got to make the patterns to make collections of patterns that you use to act on. So the patternization would supersede the schematization, but they have a dynamicism with one another and an interplay nonetheless, and I think this is roughly how the cognitive functions work, and how they break off. And not that I keep saying break off, I would say that's a horrible expression. It's not syntactically well defined. I said I think this is how the cognitive functions interject themselves into one's psyche, and perception of the world, as in they do make the frameworks, and they are the great architects of our perceptual landscape. They're not of the landscapes themselves, but would be the deities, if you will, that create the world or the picture that we see of the world, and we will never get away from them. They just will always do that. It's why one will always have a tendency to be biased in the information that they perceive, and even if one doesn't have racial biases or social biases or intellectual biases, one certainly has the cognitive ones, and so far as that we cannot assimilate all the information that is in the environment at one time and not know its relevancy and saliency all at one time, or in one instance of time per se in our immediate experience. And even when we find that we are the types of individuals such as intuitive types that readily leave our immediate experience, there is still a limitation insofar as that we cannot really know for certain what that information is and how it relates to other things, because there are frameworks that come with each function in relation to others. And so a good example is INFJs and their ability to be predictive. What INFJs do, it seems, in terms of introverted intuition and extroverted feeling, is really get at how people understand things and see things. They mirror people's responses and try and get into their mind and understand how they think. And they use that in a way to be able to project what is an insight or a thought, or what will happen, what will occur given a set of events or stimulus that suddenly interjects itself into the environment. That's kind of what they do, and it's very much based on sociality, and they have a humanization of their futuristic insights, oddly enough. And sociality and extroverted feeling have a lot to say with that. As I have polar introverted intuition, and it shows up in my psyche, but I've only had a few instances where it's given me information about what to expect from other people and what to expect in the future, given social consequences, per se. Like, I wouldn't have been able to do what Nietzsche saw in saying that because of the growing recession of Christian ideology, that there would suddenly be an advent of nihilism that would lead to the total blanketing of Europe in totalitarian regimes in the start of World War I. Like, that's something he very much saw and came up with. And I have vision. I don't see things like that very often, because I know that introverted intuition is in service of introverted thinking. So it's just to say that the frameworks, they have nuance to them given the arrangement of the functions. And the functions are the framework creating, or the schematizing agents, the orators and judiciary figures of patternization in the brain, and the hierarchical rank and importance of some types of information over other types of information, to where the intuitive functions and, the perceiving functions definitely skew in some senses, as they do have filters. They are the filters, so not all information is getting in, but none of these functions exist on islands by themselves, and they're comprised of axes, so we do get it all. We just don't get it all at the same time, and we don't organize it all in the same way, and we don't all see all things that we get as relevant or important in the same vein and in the same order. But that very truly, that the cognitive functions are the architects of our picture of the world, and they will always be that, with our base motivations and schemas, as innate schemas as human beings, being the ultimate driving forces and linchpins in terms of the palette of motivational drivers that can emerge, and the types of meaning that can be ascertained and constructed from the information in the environment, given events and phenomena in our interaction with one another. And so, in closing, those are my thoughts on cognitive functions and how I perceive them. That is a little more than one would think, as there is a theoretical basis to everything I say. So I had to introduce the theory first before I said anything about any one function, though I have already made videos on functions, but it's just to give a credence and exposition on the language I use and the terminology I have, and why the things are presented in the way that they are and what that means. And so this was more of an educational video, I guess. I don't know, there's nothing to apply, but mostly things to understand. So that's my video, and thank you for watching.